we're going to talk about a man who didn't just build a business, he built a machine. A machine so powerful it literally bent the world to its will. And in the process, it completely rewrote the rules of ambition, power, and what it means to leave a legacy.
Okay, get this. 90%. At one point, that's how much of America's entire oil supply was controlled by just one man, John D. Rockefeller, an empire built on black gold and controlled with an absolute iron fist.
And here's the craziest part of his whole story. When the US government, the most powerful government on earth, finally rose up and shattered his monopoly, thinking they'd finally beaten him, he walked away richer than he had ever been before. How is that even possible? Well, to figure that out, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. See, Rockefeller's whole approach to life, his ruthlessness, his obsession with control, it all came from his childhood, and it was all taught to him by his incredibly cruel and deceptive father. His father, William Rockefeller, was known around town as Devil Bill, and believe me, he earned that nickname. The guy was a total con artist. He'd sell colored water as a miracle cancer cure to dying people. He'd even pretend to be a deaf-mute beggar just to overhear secrets he could use to swindle farmers later. And this wasn't just how he treated strangers. This was his actual parenting philosophy. He saw his own family as a training ground for a dog-eat-dog world. I mean, just listen to his own words about it. And that lesson was burned into young John's mind forever. The story goes that one day, Devil Bill told his son to jump from a high chair, and he promised he'd catch him. John jumped. His father just stepped back and let him crash to the floor. The lesson was brutal and clear. The world is a fight, and trust is for suckers. So, armed with this, let's call it a unique education, Rockefeller dives into the chaotic, brand new world of the oil business. And in one single, dramatic moment, he would grab complete control of his own destiny. The tension in his first business partnership was just a ticking time bomb. You had a Rockefeller who saw that oil was the future and wanted to borrow every penny he could to expand. And then you had his partner, Morris Clark, who was terrified of debt and just wanted to stick with their safe, boring business. They were heading for a major collision. They just couldn't agree. So they decided to settle it once and for all. They'd hold a private auction, and the refinery would go to whichever one of them could bid the highest. It was a total showdown between caution and pure raw ambition. The bidding started, and it shot up fast. When his partner bid $50,000, a huge sum at the time, the room went dead silent. Clark was sure he'd won. But then, Rockefeller, who was just 25 years old, calmly says, $72,500. It was a number so huge, so shocking, it just completely broke his partner's will. In that one moment, everything changed. He wasn't just a partner anymore. He was the master. He walked out of that room the sole owner of what would become the seed of his entire empire, all because he was willing to bet everything on himself. Okay, so now he's in total control. This is when Rockefeller starts building Standard Oil into an unstoppable force, using tactics that were, both brilliant and absolutely brutal. He created this secret cartel with the major railroads. Here's how the scheme worked. Step 1, he gets massive secret discounts on shipping his own oil. Step 2, the railroads become his personal spy network, feeding him intel on all his rivals. And Step 3, this is the real killer move, the drawback. For every single barrel a competitor shipped, the railroad had to pay Rockefeller a fee. He literally made money when his enemies did business. It was insane. So, armed with this unbeatable weapon, he went to his competitors with a very simple choice. Sell out to me for a fair price, or I will crush you into bankruptcy. The result was what they called the Cleveland Massacre. It was a takeover of such stunning speed and brutality that in less than 3 months, he'd swallowed up nearly every single one of his rivals. But there was a problem. Technically, his growing empire was illegal. Back then, a company in one state wasn't allowed to own a company in another. So his lawyers invented something brand new, something the world had never seen before: the trust. Basically, it was a legal ghost, a shell company created to secretly hold the stock of 40 different companies, making it impossible for anyone to prove who owned what. This trust was a masterpiece of deception. Just as this journalist said at the time, everyone could feel its power. Everyone could see what it was doing to the market, but nobody could actually prove it existed. It was everywhere and nowhere at the same time, a shadow empire, controlled by one man from his office in New York. But you know, no empire lasts forever, and two new forces were finally rising to challenge Rockefeller's absolute power: a determined journalist with a very personal grudge, and a president who absolutely loved a good fight. So this journalist, Ida Tarbell, for her, this was personal. She had watched Standard Oil squeeze the life out of her own father's small oil business years earlier. Now she was looking for revenge. For 2 years, she dug and dug, unearthing secret documents, mapping out the whole conspiracy, and then she laid it all bare for the American public to see. And Tarbell's articles were exactly the ammunition President Teddy Roosevelt needed. He launched this massive government investigation into Standard Oil that worked its way through the courts for years until it finally ended up in a massive showdown at the Supreme Court. And in 1911, the verdict came down like a hammer. The Supreme Court declared that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly, and their order was simple and absolute. This great machine, this empire that took decades to build, must be destroyed. So it looked like total and complete defeat. People were literally celebrating in the streets. The Titan had finally fallen. But here comes the greatest plot twist in business history. When the trust was shattered into 34 separate companies that would become giants like ExxonMobil and Chevron, Rockefeller didn't lose his shares. He kept his stock in all of them, and as these new companies started competing with each other, their combined value absolutely skyrocketed. The breakup of his company unleashed a tidal wave of wealth that was just unimaginable. It transformed him from the most hated man in America into its first ever billionaire, and eventually one of its greatest philanthropists. Let's just try to put this into perspective. By 1916, at a time when the average American was making about $800 a year, Rockefeller's personal fortune hit $1 billion. The scale is it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. He had outlasted all his rivals, he'd outlasted his own father, and in the end, he'd even outsmarted the US government. So in his final years, he gave away enormous sums of that money. He funded universities, he funded medical research that literally wiped out diseases and saved millions of lives. But it leaves us with this one final question. Was this huge act of public good a real change of heart, atonement for his sins? Or was it a brilliant PR move to clean up his reputation? Or was it the final ultimate con from a man who was taught from day one that the world is just a game to be won? What do you think?